Hi everyone, welcome to the sewing studio. Now you can see I've got my happy face on again today because I've once again been allowed to play with the Pam and Nicky Lintott quilt pattern, which is always fun to do for me. I always really enjoy it. And the one we're looking at today is called Basket Weave, and we have it as a downloadable PDF, so it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you'll be able to access this. And it's a really nice one. And one of the things I will say about it is it's actually a lot simpler than it looks. So sometimes people look at this and go, oh, that's going to be really complicated. But actually, it wasn't that complicated. So you do have to sort of just be a little bit careful because we're working with a lot of bias edges. But outside of that, it's actually quite a nice, simple pattern to do. Now, before we get into the pattern, I will just go through some of the jelly rolls because this uses a jelly roll. It's a jelly roll quilt. And the fabric I chose, and I'm just going to bring these under the camera so you can see, because sometimes people get a little bit stuck on what fabrics to use and what's going to work and what's not going to work. And this is the one I used, and it's called Pips, and it's for Moda, and you can sort of see they're all these lovely sort of bright and fresh. So even though we're here in the winter, you know, my mind is already thinking about the lovely colours of spring, and so we went for this one. But what I will say about this one is you have got sort of these much sort of darker fabrics as well as these much sort of fresher and brighter fabrics. The pattern, you need a jelly roll, you also need an accent fabric. And the way I chose my accent fabric is I took all the strips out, I laid them all out, and then I did what they call auditioning. So I got my pieces of fabric that I thought might work, or colours of fabric that might work, and I just laid them next to them and sort of say, you know, does that work with it? Does it clash? Some colours will pop the colours forward, some will sort of calm it down. And the colour I've actually chosen to go with this is like a sort of burnt orange. My other option was going to be a blue. And what I found is the blue calmed the quilt down and would have looked lovely and would have been brilliant for like a baby quilt or a child's quilt. But I wanted something with a bit more zing, a bit more pop. And that's why I went for the orange, because that's what that sort of popped in. But you want something that's going to work with these, but that's slightly different, that's not quite the same. Because each of your strip sets that we're going to make with this, you need to add an accent fabric. So there needs to be a little bit of distinction between those. So like I say, you'll see the orange that I've used in a minute. But that, as I said, that's a Pips, it's called, and it's a Moda jelly roll. But I have selected some others. Now, thinking about spring, we've got this one. And I think I was going to say, you can tell by the colours, it's a Sherry and Chelsea one for Moda. And if I just sort of bring that round, very much those rainbow colours. So once again, and of course they're sort of greys that they bring in to their colours, but really nice colourful one here. And there's lots of different colours you could use with this one. So that's the Emma, that one's called, by Sherry and Chelsea, and that's another Moda one. Now the next one I'm just going to pull forward. Now this is very different, but decided to go with it. These are much more sort of neutrals, not so much colour, but I was thinking with this one, that you could definitely add that zing with your accent fabric and really do something that sort of contrasts with this. Now this is called Celeste, and I can't see on that one who it's by, but it's another Moda one. Oh no, sorry, Celestial. I've misread that. But that's a lovely, but much more muted, much more paler colours. But like I say, I can see me putting a really zingy accent with that and bringing that one to life. So that's another option. And then the final one is we've got some richer sort of darker tones on this one. And this is Slow Stroll. Fancy that design house. Yeah, Slow Stroll. But sort of darker, but still we're looking at that rainbow of colour. So burgundies right through to your sort of blues. I get drawn to blues in particular. So, but once again with a nice accent fabric, that would look fabulous as well. So just some different ideas, some different options. You know, there's no right or wrong. This is all a matter of sort of personal taste, if you like. So I'm just going to sort of set those there a little bit out the way. Okay, so let's have a look how to make it. Now, there were a few little notes. I actually did myself a working copy of the pattern. As I said, it's a PDF download. And I did myself a working copy so that I could make little notes all over it. And I tend to sort of do that in pencil just for little reminders for myself. But the first thing you have to do is make your octagon for the centre. So this requires an octagon for the centre. And in the pattern itself, Pam and Nicky have given you 3 different options of how to make that octagon. Now there's actually a small pattern in there which you need to enlarge by 400%. So if you haven't got facilities to be able to do that and enlarge it. They've also given you a template that you can print out, and it prints out on A4 sheet of paper, which gives you half of the octagon. And then what they say to do is do a half, flip it over and draw the other half. And that's the option I went for, but I did something slightly different from that. And then they actually give you instructions of how to make an octagon from sort of scratch, as it were. So you've got 3 different ways of making your octagon. As I said, I went for the print half of it off, and I did that. And rather than drawing it out, I just printed it twice. And when I cut it out, I cut out one on the line, and I made sure I went around the outside of the line, so I wasn't taking off any of the sizes of any of the sides. And they do say in the pattern, once you've made your template, just measure all your sides, and they give you what that should measure. But what I did on mine, you can see I've left it on there, is I cut out one exactly on the line all the way around, and I cut out one so that it just sort of extended beyond it, because what that did is it just gave me a little shelf, if you like, to sellotape the two together rather than trying to sort of button them up next to each other. And that worked first time for me. And when I measured it all the way around, it came out perfectly. So that, I would sort of say, print it twice, cut one out, cut another out with a little bit wider bit where you need to join it together. And that's a really simple way of doing it. So that would be my top tip for that bit. So once you do that, we're going to get our background piece of fabric and just pin that template onto your background piece of fabric, and literally just cut round. As I said, you can do it with a rotary cutter, you can do it with scissors. I would suggest rotary cutter. You can always be a little bit more accurate with a rotary cutter than you can with scissors. But top tip again is, if you're not sure, sort of overcut it, because you can always trim it back a little bit rather than finding you've undercut it and now your shape is too small. So I tended to just pin that one to the fabric, and I'm just going to grab a rotary cutter. Now I used flathead pins as well, so that means my ruler could sit on top of those pins without it wobbling about. And I just made sure I cut on the outside of that line. So that I wasn't slithering off little bits of the template of the shape and altering the size. These are really big blocks, so actually once you've made sort of 9 of these, you've got your quilt basically. So just take your time with this bit. And there we are, there's our octagon all done. So step number 1, make your octagon and then just go back. Oh, I could feel there was a pin under there. Move that before I blunt my rotary cutter blade. Just go back and measure those sizes and make sure they're coming out to the sizes they've put in the pattern. So once you've done that, you can sort of set that aside. Now I'm just going to do one. If you were doing the whole quilt, I would probably just cut all of those 9 out at the same time. And then you need to open up your jelly roll, and I've got some of my strips here. I've not brought it all out because I'm trying to keep my work surface tidy. So these are the colours, and what they suggest you do is you put all your strip sets into pairs. So you want to pick out 2 colours. For each block you need 2 strip sets like this. So here I've got 2 greys and 2 pinks, and this is my zingy orange accent fabric that I've used with that. So we're going to go through and just do that. Now with the Pips Jelly Roll, there was quite a lot of duplicate strips in that, so this worked really well. And I think they say in the pattern, in the Jelly Roll that they used, they had some duplicates. But just go for the same colour. If you haven't got duplicates, just go for something that reads the same colour, basically. So we're going to do 2 strip sets, and on each of them we need to make exact matches. They need to look the same, and they suggest you put the accent fabric at the top, and then I'm going to go accent pink and then my grey. Now I'm just going to sew one strip set to show you the cutting and how to start, and then I will move on to the version that's almost finished, just to save a bit of time, because these are quite long lengths sewing. So I'm just going to set that one aside for now, and we will sew that one later. But for these now, I'm just going to open these out. I'm going to take them to the sewing machine, and we're just going to sew the strips together. Now they also say that you need the 45 and 90 degree multi-size triangle. And because we're making, these are 2.5 inches, so it's going to be 6.5 inch wide, it needs to be a triangle, a 90 degree triangle, that's at least 6.5 inches. So that's the second side that I don't use quite so often on this ruler. So it's this bit here, and it's got at the top there, that's a 90 degree angle. And that's the one you're going to need. In essence, it's a 1/4 square triangle ruler. So we need that one. Now, there's plenty left over from this one, from the strips when you're cutting. So you don't have to do anything special with your cutting. You can just sort of line your strips up. However, when anybody is cutting a 45 degree angle, what some people like to do is stagger their fabrics. And all we mean by that is you just sort of stagger them by about 1 inch, which means that when you make that first cut, you've got a little bit less waste here. But there's plenty of room at the end of the strip, so you don't need to do that if you'd rather just sew them together. It's absolutely up to you. Now I'm just going to do as they say in the pattern, which is just sew them together, one straight line. So I'm going to put these together. Actually, I'm going to go that way. And then both of these are the same, so both of them will be orange, pink, and then grey. Now the other top tip I would say as well is make all your pairs before you start any of your sewing. Do a test block, make sure your strips are coming out at the right size, because when I did my first strip set for this, my strip sets were coming out slightly short. I wasn't quite at 6.5, and I realised that I was actually sewing from the wrong point. Now this is a question I get asked quite a bit as well, is where do you sew when you're doing a jelly roll? Do you measure, do you do your seam from the top of the peak of the zigzag, or from the base? Now, on most jelly rolls from Moda, I would say measure it from the valley of the peak. But this one wasn't. And I just assumed, because it was Moda, it was the same. And then I realised that actually the measurement had been taken from the top of the peaks, not the valley. So note to self, Jeanette, just get one strip out and measure it to see where they've taken the 2.5 inch wide strip from. So once I knew that, of course, I can easily adjust. But so just a little check for you. Learn from my mistakes. Right, let's put that one there. And then we're just going to sew all the way down both of these strips. Now on this one, I'm going to come back the other way because that will help stop the fabric from bowing. So we're adding that strip underneath on this one. Now I'm going to take those to the iron. Now I'm just going to check, because I'm pretty sure they say press towards the accent fabric. away from the accent fabric. Press your seams away from the accent fabric. So when you come back, when you've pressed, just make sure that you haven't got any folds along your seams, because sometimes what can happen, there can be a little bit of a fold there when you've been pressing, particularly when you're doing a big long strip. So just make sure that everything is lying nice and flat. You haven't got any tucks, you haven't got any folds in that, because that, of course, will alter the size of your strips. So this is there where we need the 90-degree triangle ruler. So this is one in effect that cuts quarter square triangles. And we're just going to lay the ruler 6.5-inch strip along the edge, just making sure that all of that ruler is on the fabric. I'm a little bit off there, and this is where I've got to make sure I'm putting mine actually on the outside of the peak. And then we're just going to cut. And then what I tend to do is just rotate this round, so I'm cutting away from myself all the time. We don't want to be cutting towards ourselves, because if we slip, we don't want to be slicing. Oh, hold on. We don't want to be slicing into ourselves. So I'm just going to line that back up. Yep. And then we can trim. And we just want to go across each of our strip sets, and this is why we need 2, because we won't quite get enough cuts for 8. You need to make 8 of these triangles. And you'll have, on each of them, you'll have a triangle where the accent fabric is at the top, so it'll be a small piece. And then on this one, because we're now cutting from the other direction, we've flipped that ruler around 180 degrees. And then our next triangle we'll have with the accent fabric as a large piece on the bottom. So it's a mirror image of the 2. So you'll end up with 4, which look like this with the smaller bit on top. And then 4 with the accent fabric on the bottom as the longer piece. So I just put them in stacks of the 2 triangles. Now I'm just going to stop there for the cutting, and we'll show you then how to put it onto the octagon. I'll come back to that later off camera. So let me just tidy that one away and pull in this. And we're now going to attach those to the octagon. And it starts by putting on one with what they call a partial seam. Now, for anybody that's new to quilting, don't be afraid of that. It just means you just sew part of the seam and you just stop before you get to the end of the seam. So the pattern tells us to take one of the triangles that's got the accent fabric at the top. So that's mine from here, and we're going to just lay it on, and you just want to let about 1/4 inch of that tip hang out on that one. Now I'm actually going to sew it from that side, and if I pin it from there, I can sort of see, and I'm just going to put a couple of pins in, and this is where we have to be a little bit careful because all of this is a bias edge. So we just want to sort of handle it gently. When we're sewing it, no pushing or pulling, just let the feed dogs, let the machine do its work. And then I'm going to sew, so if I put that there under the close-up, I'm going to sew, if I mark it, and I'm going to stop about there. So I'm going to do about half of the seam. So let's take that to the machine and sew, and then we'll bring that other triangle with us, and we'll add that one on as we go. So that's the partial seam done. So as I said, nothing difficult. So don't be afraid of that terminology at all. And then we're just going to finger press, just very gently, that little bit of the seam open, because once again, as I said, this is bias edge. Now the other thing I'm going to do, because I've got a 1/4 inch foot with a bar on it, I am just going to trim off that little dog ear there. And now, because we've sewn that little bit of the seam, we can add our first triangle. So the rule of thumb is whatever the small bit here is, that's the long strip you need to be adding to it. So we're going to put it on again, let about 1/4 of an inch hang out that edge. Now I did pin these just because it is quite a long seam, and it should go all the way across that first triangle and then across the octagon. And we should have another about 1/4 of an inch hanging off the edge there. So that's what that is beginning to look like. Just gently pressing that one open. And then I would take that little dog ear on, and then your next triangle would go there, and your next triangle would be one with the accent colour at the tip again. So you just keep going round, and once you've done that one partial seam, you only need to do it once. It will be full seams all the way around. So I'm just going to fast forward to one I've done earlier. Because you don't want to sit and watch me sewing 8 seams basically. So here's mine in a different colourway from that pack, where I've used the very zingy yellow and the blue. There's where I started on my partial seam. So this is the triangle that goes on next, and then once I've added that, we can finish this seam. So let's just turn that around and just once again place it down. Now most of you that have watched me will know that I'm not much of a pinner, but this is definitely one that benefits because of the bias. You do benefit, and also you can make sure that you've got the right amount of fabrics. They should be about sort of equal amounts of fabrics hanging off the 2 edges there. So let's take that, we're going to take that to the machine, we're going to do 1/4 of an inch all the way along there, and then we're going to press that back, and then we can finish off that first seam that we started. Now this first one we put on will fit there now because we've got something to sew it to. There we go, that's all done. Now the last step is just to square up the block by adding corners. So Pam and Nicky's pattern will tell you the size to cut for these, but basically from your square, you're going to just take it, just move that out of the way, and we're just going to cut 2 squares once across the diagonal. Like so. And then we're going to add 1 to each corner. To finish off making the block. So it's a really nice simple block. I would also pin those, just to say, because we're also attaching those to bias as well on both. The square will be a bias edge, and the wreath block itself will be a bias edge. So that's how we make the block. Should we take a closer look at Pam and Nicky's quilt behind us? So this is Pam and Nicky's quilt, and you can see here they've used this lovely pink as their accent, which blends really well with all the colours they had in their jelly roll. It's a really nice big block. So here's the block right here. So it's a really nice big block. So you say 9 blocks and you're done. And they're pretty fast because we're making strip sets. And then their layout, they've added these cornerstones and sashing. They've used a really nice edge-to-edge overall quilting pattern. It's got little dragonflies and loops in it. And so that's how they've quilted it. Now the overall size is 70 inches square, and they've just finished it with the binding. But it's a really nice one. Now I think we missed a trick really. We could have done this as Christmas. In Christmas fabric, this would look like a Christmas wreath and it would have been absolutely brilliant. But I think it looks fabulous, whatever fabric you do it in. So it's been a pleasure to work on. So thank you once again to Pam and Nicky. Absolutely really enjoyed doing it. And certainly you could just do one for a little wall hanging. If you wanted to do a little tester block, then absolutely that would be a good way to go. So thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. As you said, the pattern is available as a PDF download, so no matter where you are in the world, you should be able to get hold of that. We'll put links to in the description to anything that we've mentioned here so that you can easily get to that. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join us again here next time in the sewing studio.